Okay, nice to be back. Nice to open up another adventure. And frankly, of all the courses that I give, I must say that I have a particular affection for this journey. It's very special, and as you can see, we've advanced to the other side of the wheel and the other side of the programming. And we move over to the quarter of duality and to the 13th phase. And you can see here in there were so many possibilities, quite frankly, of gods or goddesses from any particular culture that I could have put here. Basically, this is about wisdom gods or wisdom goddesses, and basically it is about those forces that provide an answer. Because everything you're going to see, I don't know if you remember back to last semester, we went through a particular face that was all about questions. Now we're going to look at a face that is all about answers. I like Thoth. In some traditions, he's supposedly the father of Ra, so I have some kind of an attachment to it, I guess. Anyway, but he was an extraordinary wisdom god. Supposedly, he had the answer to just about anything. However, we're dealing with duality, and you can see there's a joke here in that the question came from the domain of mind, and the answer comes from the domain of duality and bonding and partnership. And so these answers have a certain slant, obviously. So without any further ado, let's take a look. This codon, this is an example in which a face is literally one codon. That is 4 variations, 4 thematics of the codon of Valin, which happens to be the final codon in the codon chain. You can see it here in the wheel. That is the positioning here in the wheel. This movement zodiacally from Leo into Libra, going across this cusp line. And it's interesting just to think about the context of this. That is, we're talking about an answer. We're talking about the way in which the personality is being conditioned to see what makes life work. What is really the answer? Now, it's interesting to note that these themes, this answer, is coming from this one chemistry. I mean, it's this one chemistry inside of our system that literally is carrying the answer mechanism. And that's quite something to think about. But let's look at it first of all in terms of the structure, so that we remind ourselves where we are here. You can see that we have the bottom binary, and of course the bottom binary is always indicative of the quarter itself. That is the quarter of duality. So here is the construct for this, and the yin below and the yang above. You can see that this has the chemical labeling of G, the G over here and the G here. You can see. And in the middle, what we're looking at always is that we're looking at the particular face. That is, we're looking at the quarter itself, and that every single one of the hexagrams here in this quarter in the center has a yin-yin configuration. This is the U, and you can see the U. And then, of course, what we get on top is the individual transition that takes place thematically from gate to gate. In other words, going through the 4 possibilities of the combination of yin and yang. So we have the basic construct of the basic mechanism. So here you're looking at Valin. You'll notice that in this case there's no sort of, other face that carries this codon information. All of it is locked in here. Here is the place, in that sense, of the answer. Now, obviously, the most obvious one that we can think of course, is the 4. And we know this well, and in many ways, this is the most dynamic, if you will, the most dynamic expression of Valley. This expression that is here in the 4th gate. Obviously, within the body graph, it's in the Ajna center. It is the gate of answers. I think one of the real dilemmas that most people have when they first, when they first enter into human design and they look at these keynotes and whatever, there is this assumption, for example, like with the 4th gate, that the fact that it is a gate of answers means that those answers are invariably correct. That's not true. We're not talking about truth, we're talking about answers. Answers don't always have to be the truth to be successful as an answer. You learn that as children in dealing with your parents. Answers are answers. So it's one of the things not to be confused here, that we're dealing somehow with this mysterious chemistry that is providing us with truth. It's providing us with answers. These are very focused, very ready answers, and that you can see what the answer itself is built on. And I'll come back to the 4 after, because it carries with it this understanding of the pattern itself. But we have to see what the construct is in order to understand what the conditioning is. Let's begin with just looking at these keynotes for a moment. Role, defined a role, to make a commitment, to make more. Defined a role. Remember, all of this is taking place within the context of duality. So this is not finding a role in the sense that you're seeking your purpose. That's not what it is. That is, in order to find your role, in order to be able to find your place within the pattern. To have a role guarantees you a place in the pattern. And the role is something that is very important. And of course, these roles, if we were to, deconstruct what this means, the role of being man and the role of being woman. In other words, if we want to look at the traditional relationship between men and women, which, by the way, has mostly been to the disadvantage of women, that we will find it here in this construct. It's here, this find a role. This is not about, figuring out how to be a doctor or a plumber. It is literally about figuring out how to be a male and how to be a female, and in that, to be able to establish the dynamic of how society is going to operate. After all, when we think about, the behavior of cultures, everything about the behavior of any culture, if you go to the root of that, which is the way in which the culture develops out of tribe, and if you go to the core of tribe is the organization of the tribe around a pattern that is based on the relationship between man and woman. There is no other way. The moment that you try to understand what it is for us to live together as beings, the first thing you have to understand is the first answer is to find this role. In other words, to really fulfill the potential of that role within the pattern. So it's very important to see that this is about, this is one of the most basic primary conditionings that we have. After all, this is the opening of duality. And duality is the answer. Duality opens with the answer. It is this answer. This answer is to find your male and female role, which means literally to to establish a pattern of what that role is, what the male does, what the female does. And of course, what we get to see is that most of that is still very primitive and still rooted in the most primitive expressions. The males by body type were capable of different things than the females. The females were the reproductive agents, which changed the dynamic because they would be responsible for nurturing. The basic role, the basic stereotype that most cultures have of the relationship between the male and the female is established here. Now, you have to understand something about the program, is that the program becomes very, very uncomfortable when you disturb its basic programmed system, which is rooted in pair bonding. For example, this is going to be the most homophobic face that you'll find in the wheel. In other words, this is the this is where a man is a man and a woman is a woman, if you get my cliche drift in all of that. In other words, it is very conservative, it is very archetypal. After all, this is an ancient programming, and it's not like it's become more sophisticated simply because civilization has changed, particularly in the last, let's say, 75 years. It doesn't mean anything. Literally. This is a very ancient program. So when you look at, female circumcision, child brides, the way Islam treats women, the way women are treated in so many cultures, here is the culprit, if you want to wag a finger in that sense. Because one of the things to recognize about the programming of the role is that what the role is really saying is that, look. What it's saying is that we cannot make it. We cannot survive without this fundamental archetype. In other words, it's got to be there. A man's got to be a man, woman's got to be a woman. This is the way it's going to be. Basta. And it isn't interested in anything else because this is a leadership role. After all, it's a seventh gate. It is the role of leadership, or the potential of leadership. And so very, very important to understand that from the point of view of the program, in this particular phase, everything that we understand about the conservative pair bond, this is where it's going to be rooted. Very straightforward. Male-female archetypal roles patterned endlessly in order to maintain ultimately tribe and community. Okay, so that's the 7. If you go from the 7 to the 29, you have make a commitment. And it is easy to say, well, okay, this is the 29th gate and it's experiential and this is all about making, a commitment to experience. But again, you have to see it within the context. We are driven psychologically by the force of the personality consciousness program to seek commitment to the other in our life as an extension of our role. None of us are free of it. I talk about it in terms of, the genetic imperative. In other words, we are driven by our genetic imperative to find that other, to find that thing we're not. To be attracted is the language to that thing we are not. And it is what pulls us into commitment. And of course, this is all about the experiential commitment of being in the now, in your role. It isn't about wanting to speculate on it. Think about the 29 and the 46, one of those wonderful, fascinating channels. When we think about the abstract, one of the things that is always part of understanding the abstract is within the sense of time, that the abstract is very much about the past. That is, it's very much about making sense out of the past, remembering the past, revealing the past. It is about, being able to measure everything based on the past. And yet in that kind of thinking, when you think about the abstract that way, there is no past without a present. I mean, it's one of the things to grasp. It is the present that makes the past. Every present, every moment creates a past. And of course, it is this present that the abstract is so deeply connected to. It doesn't know that the way individuality knows that, so that individuality is always in the now simply because of its pulse. It has, in that sense, no choice. But the abstract, being distracted by the past, often cannot truly experience the present. And it is in the experiencing of the present that the depth of the past is revealed. But later, not in the moment. This is the gift of the 46th gate, the serendipity. To be in the right place at the right moment. To be just there. And this is what the 29 seeks in its commitment. It is pointed towards serendipity. It is pointed towards being in the right place at the right time. All of that requires a deep existential approach to experience. You see, making a commitment is also surrendering to the now, not questioning it. The bride in the arranged marriage that goes to her mother and pleads, "I do not want this one." And she gets a smack for her troubles. You will see, day by day, in your commitment to your role, that you will find what you seek. Now, I'm expressing this within the context of the face. I'm not expressing my opinions. It's really something to understand about the force that is there in this make a commitment. It is surrender to your role. And it's one of the things that you see in duality. You see constantly. It's one of the reasons why in certain subcultures in the West, this dilemma in relationships, because there is this inability to surrender to the archetypal role, to be the obedient wife, to be the whatever, all of the things that are part and parcel of that process, to be the good money earner and all of these things, the pressures that are there on the archetypes of the male and the female. And there is this angst, there's a pain in so many beings in the pressure to surrender to the role. And it's not the surrender that is, enlightened. It is the surrender of a fallen and weakened victim who raises their hands in the air and says, "All right, if I have to play this role, I'll play this role, even if it's making me mad, even if it's destroying me," whatever the case may be. I mean, it's not like the gods care whether you like the answer or not. They don't. I mean, they don't care at all. And that you can see that if you are struggling with the surrender to the archetypal role, then obviously, you have a conflict with the vast majority of humanity. I mean, the vast majority, what do they call it in America? Family values, Surrender to the archetypal role. And don't challenge it. Just be there in the now. That's your serendipity. To be who you are in this life, in this way, because this is how everything works. And if you start breaking the rules, then our children are going to be raised in a way that's incorrect and blah, 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 and on and on and on. And then the tribe is going to break down and the community is going to break down. And of course it's true to a point within the context of the not self. Look at what happens in successful Western societies. Families have broken down. They simply do. And of course the stereotypes are shattered. And it means that there is tremendous insecurity in the society. And it brings a huge conflict. It brings forces into a kind of black and white, this and that conflict. The classic of the left and the right morally. And you see, in societies where this commitment to the role is maintained, you do not have such problems. You do not. The not-self world loves its control mechanisms. I mean, after all, everything about the not-self world is that the one thing you cannot challenge is the authority of the forces, of the gods, of the authorities, of everyone to run your life. You can't challenge that. And when you look at the world, you can see that this archetypal role, male or female, and the surrender, the commitment to those roles, that the vast majority of humanity is locked in this. Do not underestimate the power of this Godhead on our personalities. It's huge. And what makes it huge is that in the end, the 59th gate is valid. The 59th gate is it's a genetic role gate. I mean, it's a gate of our genetic imperative to make more. There is more reproductive, motivational power in the 59 than in any other gate. It is the reproductive engine. It's the thing that drives our survival on the planet. Remember that here we're dealing with a level that is chemistry. And we're dealing with it within the graphic of the genetic code. And to begin to see that at this level, reproduction is everything. I mean, it's everything. It is part of the roots of every single myth, of every faith, every, you name it. Go forth and multiply, make more. I mean, if there is anything that is so profoundly, deeply woven into us, is this making more. But you can see it has a context. It has a context that is very profound because it has affected all of our societies on this planet. The context is that you make more within the surrender to the role. This is the answer. You don't just make more. You don't. This is deep manipulation. It takes us away from most instances of lower forms of life. In other words, yes, there are species that do have long-term pair bonds that are specifically reproductive with only a certain mate. It is a trait that is carried in this 59th gate. And this 59th gate is, it's one of the things where every single intimacy in your life, from the point of view of the 59th gate, should be a marriage, should be a bond, should be a commitment to the role over time to make more. This is what's there. There is no, there's no way to see this reproductive potential outside of duality and this commitment to the role of being male and female. And it means in this 59 that the way in which one attracts the other has a male and female quality. Everything about the stereotypes of man and woman, absolutely everything you can imagine about the stereotypes of man and woman are here in this face. This is where we get locked in to these roles. Now, by the way, I'm not suggesting for a moment that the general concept is, incorrect or whatever. There's no point in looking at things that way. This is how we have been driven in this binary, this gender binary, to form a construct that will allow us to flourish. And in order to do that, you can see that the first rule is conditioning. Conditioning. The role of what it is to be the stereotype male or the stereotype female, these are not natural. They're not natural. I pick up my kids from school every day, and it's always fun to watch the world of young people, and I'll pick up my youngest and a friend of his, and listen to their conversation as I'm driving home. And there is this purity and innocence of their uniqueness, and then there's these layers of what they've learned through conditioning in the adult world, what they've learned about how it is to be a boy or a girl. And it is so obvious how you can see that what they take, or what they in fact, clothe themselves with, is specifically oriented to their role model. And of course, this is the way that it works. And the establishing of that role of what it is to be male and female, this is established by the male and female. It is a vicious circle. And of course, it's like telling the bruised little boy that boys don't cry, or, blah, 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 all that stuff, goes on and on and on. All of the things, all of the language, all of the conditioning that is imposed on us to be, some vague stereotype of what it is to be, a proper, a good boy, a good girl, whatever the hell that happens to be. One has to see that these are roles that are established. And we are so sophisticated in the way in which that is done. We're overwhelmed with it. The programming that's available, television, films, the way in which the roles of male and female are established, the amount of this kind of conditioning that children get to see thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of what it is to be male and what it is to be female, and you can see it. I mean, living as I have for many years in other places, other countries, watching local television in different countries, the way in which you can see the establishment of those roles, all of that's here. It's just here. That measuring stick, because it's always a measuring stick. This is the theme of the four in the end. It's a measuring stick. To be able to measure your maleness, to be able to measure your femaleness. I remember, what was the name of this magazine? Cosmopolitan. In the femme lib age, with its bizarre, questionnaires that you would fill out to find out what kind of a role you were here to play as a woman, and so forth and so on, and all of this stuff. You can see how deeply, deeply ingrained it is in us. You see, the not-self is helpless. I mean, helpless. See, I can, explain this to you. And you can see it for what it is. The fact that you understand that the role that you play as a male or female, which was established through the conditioning of family and culture over your whole lifetime, that there is no way that you are simply by thinking it going to be able to change that. In other words, you cannot eliminate this kind of programming. It's a deep, deep force. What you can do is be correct in your process. In other words, the moment that somebody expects you to be, measured in reference to some aspect of the role, this way or that way, and your inner authority says, no, okay, this is what correctness is all about. But please understand that this is humanity. It's not like we're going to be able to change any of it. See, it's one of the things human design's individual knowledge, one person at a time, one transformation at a time. It is not messianic. It is not for the planet. As much as it could be, it is not. I understand the depth. You can too by now, and going just around this wheel, just to understand how the personality is influenced. And remember that the vast majority of humanity operate out of the mind, where the impact of these clusters, where the impact of these faces have its deepest value. You see, if you break the covenant, it simply means that you abandon mind as your decision-making force, but it doesn't mean that this is not what your mind will have to deal with. It will. And your mind will still look to itself within the context of the measurement of its role. But this knowledge and liberation in this knowledge is not about what we think. It's about how we live and how we decide. Not what we think. The thinking is always going to be part of the programming. Always. It's why mind is not to be acted on. It's to be observed. It's to be appreciated for its intricacy and its beauty, for its malevolence, for its joy, for its games. To appreciate it is one thing, but to act on it, to act on this, to put the boy and girl into the pit to be stoned because they walked down the street holding hands. Ooh. You see, the world we live in is a mental world. A world ruled by mind, where mind makes the decisions. And here are the answers. The answer is, not only are we not here to be alone, but in order to fulfill what we are, we must find a bond. We must make more. We must be committed to our roles as males and females in that construct. This is the answer. Don't worry about bigger issues. Just take care of your commitment in the now. Look after your business. Look after your family. This is the program. And there is nothing here that says, let's have a revolution. And there's nothing here that says, let's turn all this upside down. And there's nothing here that says that you can challenge it. Nothing. Nothing. It is so powerful. And it's in all of us, after all. I mean, it's the thing to understand about the impact of this kind of programming. It's in everybody. That little boy or girl standing in front of the mirror, trying to find their archetype, their stereotype, trying to be like dad and mom, pretending, playing house, all of that stuff. It's so amazing. I mean, like everybody else, these seemed like obvious things when I was growing up. I mean, just obvious things. This is what life was going to be about. You grew up, you found a partner, and you had children. And, there are other aspects, what you're going to do, the career-wise, but that's not, an answer. Here is the answer. Everybody growing up is looking for that partner. Everybody growing up is looking for that commitment. Everybody growing up is looking to create that family. Now, yes, of course, there are exceptions. But, we're talking about billions and billions and billions. The vast, vast, vast majority. This is the way we all grow up. And, of course, to see that in and of itself, nothing wrong with that. After all, we have to keep the species going. But it's the conditioning of it. Because the conditioning becomes, it becomes the prison. The role becomes a prison. And as I said, in most cases, it is a prison that is most uncomfortable for women. You read the intellectual press or international news coverage, and there are always these attempts to try to influence other cultures in the way in which they treat their children, the way they treat their women, whatever. There's enormous resistance to that, because it's not something that, because you see it's not correct relative to this or that, you have to see the roots are so deep. They're so deep. You cannot just do that. It's like those people that want to liberate Muslim women. You can't do that. You will put 1 billion people into upheaval, and you will destroy the infrastructure of their culture and society. They won't do that. They can't do that. They can't do that because they're in the thrall of the not-self, and they're locked into these answers. So this idea that somehow we're going to be able to, change the world by educating, by bringing objectivity, blah, 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 all this stuff. Wow, that all sounds very nice. It really does. But it hasn't stopped the horrors that go on a day-to-day basis. And it doesn't stop the imprisoning of the spirit of beings through roles. It goes on all the time. All the time. It's just the way that it is. See, my point in taking this journey, all the interesting data is secondary in a sense to really grasping how profound we are programmed. How deeply manipulated the totality is, how alive the Godhead is. How alive it is as a force. And you see, what's so interesting about the Godhead, for me anyway, is that the moment that you enter into operating correctly, your strategy and authority, you strip all the gods of their power. All of them. It's quite something to think of. All of them. Because everything that they can do is based on mind. And it's based on mind being the decision maker, doing the acting. And you see, this is the difference in this age now, with the door closing. There is no way inherent in the program that there is enough awareness that any of this at a global level could ever change. It's not built into the program. It's not part of the coming mutation. It has nothing to do with it. There's no breaking from this. But there is the potential in the individual to break the covenant with these forces and not to be manipulated by them. It does not mean that you do not find a role. Everyone does. But it means that in terms of your own authority, it is yours. It is not imposed on you. It is not being conditioned by your culture, your society, or the authority of your religion. And you see, to make a commitment is what life is about, after all. We are all here to experience this life. But as long as that is a mental process, you never get the essential experience that is there for you, that can only come from your own authority. And making more? Well, yes, of course. After all, it is what we are about as an animal, all creatures, all things. We are here to make more. It is a beautiful thing, can be. But in correctness, and only in correctness. And you see, this is not something that society or cultures as a whole can embrace. The cultures would begin to break down if everybody had their own authority. And the program is not designed for anarchy. It is not. And it leads us to the fourth gate. The fourth gate is the key in this system. Understand the pattern. Everything about the answer is that the answer is there in the pattern, and that the pattern needs to be maintained. And if you maintain the pattern, everything is going to be okay. This is the answer. This is what mind is given. Here's the answer. We have been doing it this way for 1,000 years, and we will continue to do it this way. You know? The pattern. This is really it's almost like the history in a sense. You know, the tradition, the holding of the tradition as a pattern, that only by holding the pattern will, you know, the continuity lead to continued flourishing. It's this maintaining of the pattern that, you know, allowed humanity to rise above its animalness, after all. Society, culture, the community, the beginnings of, you know, the walled communities of Mesopotamia, the organizing of society, the rules that were necessary in all of that, a pattern that was to be established, a pattern that would lay out the framework of what it is to be a man or a woman in this life. And you see, if you look at the fourth gate is responsible in that sense for all of the writings, all of the revelations of the relationship intended to be between male and female in every culture, in every religion. You see, this is where it begins. You know, this pattern. You know, understand the pattern. It began with, you know, if you take, a Mediterranean variation, it began with Adam and Eve. You know, Adam and Eve in the garden. Here is your stereotypes. Not nice ones, by the way, if you really look at them carefully, but nonetheless. You know, there's this long tradition of the role and the commitment and the making more. And it goes on and on and on. And all of our societies, what do they do? What do our religions do? Look at the stories that they tell. They tell the story of this one begat that one who begat this one who begat that one who begat the next one. Here is the pattern going all the way back. It's like the Catholic Church saying we don't want female priests. We've only had male priests for 2,000 years. We're not going to change the pattern. If we change the pattern, we threaten the validity of the answer. And they do. You know, they do. You can see how, in terms of Catholicism, how the social liberal nations that were actually the core strength of Catholicism, how their secularism has become a deep threat to the pattern of the role of male and female. How dare she want to be priest and pope? You know, I mean, the threat to the commitment, you know, that there isn't this commitment to the bond, people not getting married enough, all the divorces, all of these things that are so much part of, what it is to maintain the pattern. This is a real lock here. You see, when we think of the wisdom God, we think of that God that is going to give us the answer we want. Here you get the answer you need, and it's not what you need, it's what the program wants you to need. This is what you're getting. This really deep conditioning to this pattern of relationship. So you can see how the dilemma of duality begins with, this problem that is always going to be there in the male-female bond. The problem that is there in the male-female bond that, has always been there. And it's always been there because there is no freedom in those roles. There isn't. They are locked in. They are watched by the generations before them. They are judged by the generations after them. And they are controlled by their priests and their mullahs and their governments. And here is where you can see that, tradition becomes, in fact, nothing more than conservatism. And I say that not as political conservatism, but in the deepest sense of that word. To conserve the society and the culture, to conserve that through maintaining the traditional patterns of role and commitment and reproduction. So here is that lovely, lovely conditioning. See, duality is quite a thing. I mean, when you think about the whole construct of the wheel, this movement of mind into form, this initiation into civilization, and yet this basic binary of, in a sense, energy and matter, that this basic binary only truly finds its nature in duality. I mean, after all, by the time we get to mutation is really about how to close cycles, how to close doors, how to complete one's process. But the essential aspect of the process is all there in duality. This is the essential process. So in terms of the program, it does not like challenges to this essential process. It does not. I mean, it's one of the things that you see in any cult or any sect that has emerged over the last 200-300 years, is that the first thing that they do is that they control the pair bond. They control the quality and the type of commitment. They control the pattern. They set a tradition. They control the reproduction. I mean, all of these things. I mean, this is the way in which, it's the way in which cultures are built. So here you're looking at something that's very, very powerful, and it's not necessarily something that is comfortable to any of us, in the sense that, it's not like any of us who have any kind of awareness appreciate being locked into what are conditioned behavioral patterns that have absolutely nothing to do with what we are as beings. I mean, it's offensive. And of course, again, to understand the overwhelming power of the program, it's not like you can preach to people that, they need to break with this, because it will always fall on deaf ears. See, no human being can begin to even experience truth until their mind stops being the boss in their life. I mean, you're not going to get to really see anything until your mind stops being your decision maker. And we know that this is not a mass, planetary thing. It's not going to happen. This is not what the program wants, not what the program will allow. It isn't the point. It's why it's so important that, anyone that you meet along the road, anyone that's there on your fractal, that the opportunity is there to give that single person an opportunity to find themselves. Because in the end, that's what it is. You find yourself. You find within your authority what is correct. I enjoy the role I play as a male in my life. I enjoy the commitment to that process. It's an interesting process. I enjoy my children. It is not about any of these things need to be discarded. But the traditions that bind all of those things don't exist in my life. I don't follow any tradition within the context of those, other than what is natural for me. And I mean, this is the thing to recognize about our own lives, is that the thematic, the way in which the world operates. This is what is. And this is a deep, as you can tell, incredibly deep influence on all of our lives, everybody's life. I mean, it is, it's as profound an influence as anything that we've seen in a face. All concentrated in this one codon, all concentrated in this one face, and all pointed to the same thing. The conservative, evolutionary, because it's evolutionary, that is the way in which the pair bond has emerged out of European culture, the way it's emerged out of African or Asian cultures, the way in which all of this has emerged over time, fixed as a pattern and a tradition, and what it is today. Again, nothing to do but to be aware. See it for what it is. And recognize that you're only free from it, when you're operating correctly as yourself. When you're operating out of your own authority. Otherwise, there is no way that you can stand up to the pressure of this. Because the pressure is there, it's all around you. And because this is the central ingredient in the way in which humans live together, it's always being observed and commented on. This is, thought. As I said, it could be it could be many, many gods. If you look at all of the traditions, they're all basically follow this program. I mean, it is the answer for all religions. It's the answer morally within all religions, but the way in which man and woman should be together, and what the role of family is, what the commitment is. The only thing that's different is the costumes, the nuances of the way in which the relationships operate, but it's universal. This is valid. One of the most significant codons that we will look at. Okay, that was very nice. Nice to be back in the classroom. Nice to share this. It's wonderful stuff, quarter by quarter. I love it. So, welcome back. And until next week. And by the way, the resources will be up in a little while. And until next time. Bye for now.